London, 1853. Fog rolled through the streets like unspoken secrets, swallowing the lamplight and curling around the wheels of carriages that rattled over cobblestones. In the upper room of a quiet tavern near Chancery Lane, Clara Whitmore sat with her gloved hands clenched tightly around a teacup gone cold. Her eyes, soft and intelligent, flicked toward the man sitting across from her, Lord Ashcombe, a statesman known for his silken charm and merciless ambition. "You owe me a debt, Miss Whitmore," he said smoothly, tapping the edge of his cane against the floor. "And I am a man who does not forget what is owed." Clara lifted her gaze, heart thudding. "I haven't forgotten, my lord. I would do anything within my means to repay it." He smiled, the kind of smile that made others shiver. "Good, because I have a task for you, a delicate one." From his pocket he produced a sealed document and slid it across the table. Wax glimmered red in the candlelight, stamped with the crest of the crown. "You will go to Ravensleigh Hall, the country estate of Adrian, Earl of Renford. You will present yourself as a tutor for his niece, Lady Beatrice. You will gain his trust. And while you do so," he leaned forward, voice lowering to a serpent's whisper, "you will gather proof that he plots against Her Majesty's government." Clara froze. "You believe the Earl is a traitor?" Ashcombe's eyes glinted. "I don't believe, my dear. I know. He funds publications that oppose the war, shelters men who deserted the army, and speaks of reform. He hides behind charity, but make no mistake, he is dangerous." The teacup rattled in her hand. "And if I refuse, then your brother remains in debtor's prison," he said lightly, "and your family name will never rise again." Her breath caught. Her brother, her only family left, the one she'd sworn to protect after their parents died of fever. Ashcombe sat back, watching her crumble in silence. "You're a clever girl, Miss Whitmore. Use that cleverness, charm him, observe him, and if you find nothing," his smirk sharpened, "then create something worth finding." Clara rose on trembling legs, her voice faint. "You're asking me to betray an innocent man." "I'm asking you to survive," Ashcombe said. "There's a difference." Outside, the city bells tolled midnight. She left the tavern with the envelope clutched to her chest, her footsteps echoing through the mist. 3 days later, a carriage carried her north toward the moors, toward the towering cliffs of Ravensleigh, where rumor claimed the Earl lived like a ghost. As the wheels turned and the world grew colder, Clara whispered a silent vow. "I will do this," she murmured. "I will repay what I owe." But even as she said it, her heart rebelled. Something deep within her whispered that debts repaid with deceit come due in other, crueler ways. When the carriage crested the final hill, the estate appeared, vast, ancient, wrapped in ivy and shadow. Ravensleigh Hall loomed against the storm-gray sky, its windows glimmering like watchful eyes. The driver muttered under his breath, "The Earl's a strange one, miss, kind but cursed. They say his heart died with the war." Clara said nothing. Her hand found the letter in her pocket, its seal unbroken. The ink inside, she knew, contained the instructions that would change everything. As the carriage drew up to the gates, thunder rolled across the valley. The driver helped her down, and for a long moment she simply stood there, a figure of pale resolve beneath the great iron arch that bore the crest of Renford, a falcon in flight. She was not a spy, she told herself. She was a sister, a daughter, a woman caught in a game she could not escape. But when the door of Ravensleigh opened and a tall, solemn figure appeared in its frame, the Earl himself, his dark hair touched with gray, his eyes like tempered steel, Clara felt the lie of that thought. Because at that moment, without knowing why, she realized something terrifying. This man was not her enemy, and that truth, she feared, would destroy her far more completely than any secret ever could. The first thing Clara noticed about Earl Adrian Renford was not his stature or his title, but his eyes, the weary gray of a sky that had seen too many storms. He was not at all the cold, calculating man she had been warned about. There was strength in his silence, yes, but also a stillness that felt almost sorrowful. He greeted her at the entrance of Ravensleigh Hall with a quiet nod, his voice low, touched by an accent that made every word feel deliberate. "Miss Whitmore, I presume," he said. "My housekeeper informs me you have come to educate my niece. I trust you found the journey tolerable." "It was long, my lord," Clara replied, clutching her gloves to still her trembling hands. "But I am honored to be here." "Honored?" He smiled faintly, a ghost of amusement. "You'll find Ravensleigh a dull place for honor. We live simply. My niece, Lady Beatrice, will be your chief company. I hope you are fond of solitude." "I am, my lord," she lied. He regarded her for a moment longer, then turned. "Mrs. Alcott will show you to your rooms. Supper is at 7. We dine without ceremony." As she followed the housekeeper down the corridor, Clara's mind raced. This was no rebel, no traitor cloaked in deceit. The Earl moved with the quiet of a man who had seen battle, not in politics, but in life. The kind of quiet that grief leaves behind. The manor itself reflected him, vast but subdued, with firelight flickering against dark wood and portraits watching from every wall. In one, a young soldier stood proudly beside a woman with a kind smile and flowers in her hair. Clara paused, reading the brass plaque beneath. Lord Adrian Renford and Lady Eleanor, 1848. "His late wife," Mrs. Alcott murmured softly from behind. "God rest her. Fever took her not long after he returned from Crimea. He was never the same after." Clara lowered her eyes. "And the child?" "Their son died young, miss. He has only Lady Beatrice now, his sister's girl. She keeps what's left of his heart alive." Later, as Clara unpacked her things in the modest guest room overlooking the misty moor, she couldn't stop thinking about that portrait, about the sorrow in the Earl's eyes. How could such a man be accused of treason? That evening, she was invited to dine in the smaller parlor, where the fire glowed warmly against the stone. The Earl sat at the head of the table, Lady Beatrice beside him, a lively child with a golden braid and a mischievous grin. "You mustn't be frightened of my uncle," Beatrice whispered as Clara took her seat. "He only looks cross when he's thinking, and he's always thinking." "Is that so?" Clara said, smiling. "It's quite true," the Earl replied dryly, sipping his wine. "I am cursed with too many thoughts and not enough peace." Dinner passed with quiet conversation. Clara observed everything: the Earl's courtesy, the servant's respect, the way he listened when she spoke. When she mentioned her knowledge of languages, his gaze lifted with interest. "French, Latin, and a little Greek," she said modestly. "A little?" His lips twitched. "That's more than I can claim. You are overqualified for this household, Miss Whitmore." "I doubt that, my lord," she replied gently. He smiled, small but real, and for a moment the air shifted. It wasn't the smile of a traitor or a nobleman. It was the smile of a man who had forgotten how to be seen. After supper, Clara found herself wandering the library, walls lined floor to ceiling with books. The scent of parchment and candle wax filled the air. A globe stood by the window, a piano untouched in the corner. She ran her hand along the spines, histories, philosophies, poetry. These were not the possessions of a conspirator, but of a thinker. And yet, she reminded herself, spies are not sent to find innocence. They are sent to prove guilt. As the clock struck 9, she opened her small notebook and began to write her first report to Lord Ashcombe. "The Earl of Renford is not what rumor claims. He is distant, yes, but kind. He bears himself with the dignity of one who has suffered much. His household is orderly, his servants loyal. I have yet to find evidence of rebellion, but I will observe closely." Her quill paused. A drop of ink bloomed on the page like a spreading wound. She added one last line before closing it. "I do not think I will like what I am asked to do." The wind howled outside as she sealed the letter. Somewhere down the hall, she heard faint laughter. The Earl's niece, perhaps, chasing shadows with her guardian, and Clara realized that the sound, that small human joy, was the first truly living thing she had heard since she arrived. The days that followed unfolded like the slow turning of a fragile page, quiet, deliberate, and steeped in unease. Clara had come to Ravensleigh Hall with the determination of a woman who believed she could keep her heart separate from her duty. But every hour spent in the Earl's presence made that illusion crumble further. Her mission was clear: observe, report, uncover. Yet every time she raised her pen to write something damning, she found only kindness instead. The Earl was no whispering conspirator. He was a man trying to hold his fractured world together. Each morning, she taught Lady Beatrice her letters and history by the fireside, her laughter ringing through the hall. Sometimes the Earl would pause by the door, pretending to examine a book or a document, though Clara could sense that he lingered simply to listen. In the afternoons, she often saw him riding across the moors, alone against the bleak sky, a dark figure cut from solitude. When he returned, his boots were muddied, his gloves worn, and his expression distant, as though haunted by memories only he could see. One evening, while helping Beatrice prepare her reading, Clara noticed an unopened stack of letters on the Earl's desk. Her pulse quickened. The seal was not royal, but private, the emblem of the Exiled Veterans Society. Carefully, she made note of the insignia, her spy's instincts whispering that this might be what Ashcombe sought. That night, by the dim light of a candle, she unfolded one of the letters she had copied by memory. It read, "To His Lordship, the Earl of Renford, we have received the funds for the schoolhouse repairs. The widows thank you, and the orphans pray for you. Were it not for your charity, they would have starved this winter. God bless your mercy." Clara's breath caught. This was no rebellion. It was compassion. The Earl was not plotting treason, but spending his fortune to help the forgotten soldiers abandoned after the Crimean War. Her stomach turned. The mission she carried, the lies she was ordered to weave, were a trap designed to ruin a man who dared to care. She stared at the candle flame until tears blurred her vision. Her trembling hand reached for the notebook she had been keeping for Ashcombe, the cold log of a spy. Slowly, she tore out the last page, the one where she had written his good deeds, and fed it to the flame. The fire devoured the words, leaving only ash. But the guilt didn't burn away. Later that evening, as she walked through the hall, she heard the Earl speaking softly to one of his men, Captain Ellery, a former soldier. She paused in the shadows, heart pounding. "She must not know," Ellery whispered. "If word spreads, the Crown will brand you a sympathizer." "I am not ashamed," the Earl replied. "I swore to defend my men. If the cost of compassion is condemnation, then let them call me traitor." There was no deceit in his voice, only a weary defiance. Clara pressed her back to the wall, tears stinging her eyes. Every lie Ashcombe had told her twisted inside her like a knife. This man was no enemy. He was what honor should have been. That night, she couldn't sleep. The wind rattled her window pane, whispering like a conscience she could not quiet. She took out the letter meant for Ashcombe, the one she was supposed to send by morning. Her instructions were to report any suspicious activity. Her quill hovered above the paper. Then, with deliberate care, she wrote, "No evidence yet. The Earl's dealings remain obscure. I will continue my observation." A lie, the first she'd ever told for the right reason. In the silence that followed, she pressed her hand against her chest, feeling her heartbeat race. It was not the fear of discovery that made her tremble. It was the dawning truth that her loyalty was shifting. The next day, when the Earl joined her and Lady Beatrice in the garden, Clara found herself watching him in a new light. He knelt to fix the child's kite, his large hands gentle, his patience endless. When Beatrice ran off, giggling into the wind, he turned to Clara with a faint smile. "You've brought laughter back to this house," he said. "I'd forgotten what it sounded like." "It's your kindness that made it possible, my lord," she replied softly. He looked at her, his gaze searching, as though he wanted to believe that, but couldn't. "Kindness," he murmured, almost to himself. "Some would call it weakness." "Then the world is crueler than I imagined," she said quietly. For a long moment they simply stood there, the wind tugging at her hair, the Earl's eyes glimmering with something he didn't yet understand. When he turned away, Clara realized with sudden aching certainty that her mission was no longer to destroy him. It was to protect him from the very world she had been sent to serve, and perhaps, without meaning to, from herself. Ravensleigh Hall had grown softer since Clara's arrival, the silence less suffocating, the halls warmer. The servants began to smile more freely. Laughter returned in quiet bursts like sunlight breaking through clouds. Yet amid this fragile peace, Clara's heart carried a storm. Each day she spent beside the Earl made the truth of her deceit harder to bear, and each night her dreams tangled with guilt and something far more dangerous, longing. The Earl's presence filled the house even in silence. He was not a man who needed to speak to command a room. When he passed through the corridors, his coat brushing the polished wood, every servant bowed out of respect, not fear. Clara watched him often, too often. She memorized the way his brow furrowed when reading, how his expression softened when Beatrice laughed, and the quiet strength in his voice when he said her name. Miss Whitmore. It always came out low, deliberate, as if he tasted every syllable. One evening, while she sorted lessons in the library, she found a leather-bound journal lying open on the desk. She hadn't meant to look. Curiosity was the cruelest temptation, but the words caught her eye. Mercy is the last defiance left to a soldier who has seen too much. She froze. The ink was fresh. Her breath trembled as she realized it was his handwriting. The Earl's voice startled her. "You read Latin?" Clara spun around. He stood in the doorway, one hand resting on the frame, candlelight tracing the faint scar along his cheek. I was only admiring your translation, my lord," she stammered. He stepped inside, his boots silent on the rug. "That line is my own, not from the text. I record my thoughts there. It's no matter, though I rarely share them." Her cheeks flushed. "Forgive me, it wasn't my place." He studied her, his gaze neither cold nor kind, only curious. "Tell me, Miss Whitmore, do you always apologize for curiosity?" "I find it safer," she replied softly. Something in his expression shifted, the faintest ghost of amusement. "Then you must find this house perilous indeed." Their eyes met, a moment suspended between truth and disguise. She wanted to look away, but couldn't. "I hear you walk the corridors late at night," he said after a pause. "Do you not sleep well?" Clara swallowed hard. "Sometimes my thoughts keep me awake." "Thoughts," he repeated, "or secrets." Her pulse quickened. "My lord," he raised a hand lightly. "Forgive me, it isn't accusation, merely observation. You wear your worry like a second gown." His words pierced deeper than she wanted to admit. She forced a small smile. "You are too perceptive, my lord." "I was a soldier once," he said, turning toward the window. "You learn to read faces when you've seen too many men hide their pain." Outside, the rain fell in silver sheets against the glass. He stood in profile, tall, composed, yet unmistakably lonely. "Tell me," he said quietly, "why did you come here, truly?" The question hung in the air like a blade. Clara's throat tightened. She could not tell him the truth, not yet. "For work," she whispered, "to repay debts and do some good." He turned back to her, his eyes dark with something unreadable. "And do you think you've done good here?" "Yes," she breathed, "but not enough." He smiled faintly, the kind of smile that hid pain. "Nor have I." When he left the library, her knees gave way, and she sank into the nearest chair. Her hands trembled as she buried her face in them. He knew she was hiding something. She could feel it, not suspicion, but intuition. The next morning, the Earl's behavior changed subtly. He spoke less, watched more. At breakfast, his gaze lingered on her with quiet intensity, as though weighing her every word. Yet even in that scrutiny, there was no anger, only curiosity. Beatrice noticed too. "Uncle watches you like he's trying to read a book he can't quite understand," the child said innocently as they walked the garden path. Clara forced a laugh, though her heart raced. "Your uncle is a man who observes everyone." Beatrice shook her head. "No, not like that." That night, Clara found another letter from Ashcombe hidden among her things, slipped under her door. "Your silence grows troubling. If you cannot find guilt, you will create it. A single forged document will suffice. You have 1 week. Do not fail me." Her stomach turned. The shadows of her choices were closing in, and as she read those words, a knock echoed against her door. "Miss Whitmore," came the Earl's voice, calm but firm. "A word, if you please." Clara froze, the letter still in her hand. When she opened the door, he stood there, his expression unreadable, his presence filling the narrow corridor. "I find myself troubled," he said. "You are not what you seem." Her breath caught. "My lord." He stepped closer, his voice low but not unkind. "I only hope whatever you hide, Miss Whitmore, it is not your heart." Then he turned and walked away, leaving her in the dim candlelight, shaking, breathless, and more afraid of her own feelings than his suspicion. Because for the first time since she had come to Ravensleigh Hall, Clara realized something terrifyingly simple. She was no longer afraid of being discovered. She was afraid of losing him. The following morning dawned bleak and gray, the sky the color of tarnished silver. Clara rose before the servants, unable to sleep, the note from Lord Ashcombe still burning in her mind. His words, "If you cannot find guilt, create it," coiled around her like smoke. Every step she took through the quiet corridors of Ravensleigh Hall echoed with guilt. She had thought she could delay, that somehow fate would spare her the final act of betrayal. But now, the moment she had feared most had come. When the carriage arrived that afternoon, carrying crates of supplies from London, one of the footmen brought her a small parcel wrapped in oilcloth. Her heart clenched. She didn't need to open it to know. Inside lay a sealed envelope, stamped with the royal crest, forged orders implicating the Earl of Renford in a conspiracy against the crown. Her hands shook as she unfolded the accompanying note. "Place this among his private papers. Once it is discovered, your debt is forgiven." A single line at the bottom chilled her blood. "And remember, Miss Whitmore, the Earl's life means nothing compared to your family's." For the first time since her arrival, Clara felt truly trapped. The walls of Ravensleigh seemed to close around her, every corridor whispering of deceit. She could not breathe. That evening, the Earl was away in the village, attending to an ill tenant. His absence left the manor eerily still. Only the rain against the bend windows and the faint crackle of the hearth broke the silence. The moment for her betrayal had come, and she could not delay it any longer. She walked the long corridor to his study, clutching the forged letter as though it were a living thing trying to escape her grasp. The air was thick with candle smoke and old paper. The scent of him lingered there, ink, cedar, and something faintly bitter, like the ashes of extinguished hope. Her trembling hand reached toward the drawer of his desk, where she knew his correspondence was kept. One motion, one act, and her debt would vanish. But as she pulled the drawer open, something caught her eye. A small, leather-bound notebook lay there, its pages worn with age. Against her better judgment, she turned the cover. Inside were sketches, crude but tender, of Lady Beatrice, of the late Lady Eleanor, and of nameless villagers, mothers, children, soldiers missing limbs. And beneath each sketch, a single line of handwriting. "All I have left are those I can still help." Tears stung Clara's eyes. She flipped through page after page, finding not rebellion, but compassion. Ledgers detailing money sent to orphanages, plans for rebuilding burnt cottages, donations to war widows. Every crime she'd been sent to uncover was an act of mercy. Her hand went slack. The forged letter fell to the floor like a dead thing. She sank into the Earl's chair, pressing her palms to her face. "What have I done?" she whispered, though she hadn't yet done it. But her silence, her cooperation with Ashcombe, had already been betrayal enough. As she wept, a sound startled her, the door creaking open. "Miss Whitmore?" She froze. The Earl stood in the doorway, his riding cloak damp from the rain, his expression unreadable. "My lord," she stammered, rising quickly, wiping her tears. I was only preparing lessons." His eyes fell to the floor, to the parchment that lay half hidden beneath the desk. He bent, lifted it, and turned it over in his hands. "What is this?" Her throat went dry. "A letter. It was—" His gaze sharpened, not in anger, but in realization. "You were sent here under false pretenses." There it was, the death of all pretense. The truth had found her, and she could no longer run. "Yes," she whispered, "but not for what you think." "Then tell me," he said softly, his voice breaking the air like a quiet storm. "Tell me why." Clara's composure collapsed. The words tumbled from her lips. The debt, her brother's imprisonment, the orders, the lies she'd been forced to carry. "I swear to you I never meant to harm you," she cried. "I wanted to stop it, to protect you." The Earl's face darkened, not with rage, but with heartbreak. He turned away, running a hand through his hair. "So it's true," he murmured. "Even mercy makes enemies." He looked back at her then, his gray eyes hollow but gentle. "Did you ever mean anything you said to me, Miss Whitmore?" "Yes," she whispered through tears. "Everything. That is my greatest sin." For a long time, he said nothing. Then, With the calm of a man who had known loss before, he crossed to the fire, threw the forged letter into the flames, and watched it burn. When it was gone, he turned to her again. "I do not know if I can forgive you," he said quietly, "but I will not destroy you. Leave Ravensleigh by dawn. Take whatever peace you can salvage." Her breath caught. "You're letting me go?" He nodded. "I've seen enough ruin in war. I will not create it here." As he left the room, his voice trembled, the faintest echo of something once tender. "You should have trusted my kindness, Miss Whitmore. It would have saved us both." And then he was gone, leaving Clara alone in the dying firelight, her heart splintered between gratitude and despair. The letter was ash. Her mission was over. But so it seemed, was her soul. Morning broke cold and pale, as if even the sun hesitated to rise over Ravensleigh Hall. A thin mist clung to the grounds, veiling the gardens and the cliffs beyond. Clara packed her belongings with trembling hands, the shawl her mother had left her, a few books, and the ink-stained notebook that had once been her weapon and had now become her confession. Her eyes burned from sleeplessness, her heart heavy with a grief she could neither name nor voice. She had thought his mercy would set her free. Instead, it left her hollow. The corridor outside her chamber was silent, except for the faint echo of her footsteps. Servants avoided her gaze as she passed. They had been told she was leaving, though none dared to ask why. Every polished door, every portrait, every breath of cold air seemed to whisper her shame. She descended the grand staircase and stopped before the tall windows overlooking the sea. The sky was colorless, the waves restless, thrashing against the cliffs like anger that could not be stilled. Behind her, a voice broke the silence. "Leaving without farewell?" Her breath caught. She turned. Earl Adrian Renford stood in the doorway, his posture rigid, his expression unreadable. The fire behind him cast a soft light against the fine lines of weariness that marked his face. "My lord," she whispered, "you made it clear last night that I had overstayed my welcome." "I said you should go," he replied evenly. "Not that I wished it." Clara looked down. "There's no difference." He stepped closer, his voice quiet but firm. "There is every difference. I sent you away because I did not trust what your presence was doing to me." Her heart stilled. "What do you mean?" "I mean," he said, "that I wanted to believe your deception was all performance, that I could despise you for it. But I cannot." He paused, his voice faltering just enough to reveal the fracture beneath his composure. "You lied to me, Miss Whitmore. And yet, I find myself mourning your absence before you've even left." Clara's throat tightened. "You should not forgive me. I betrayed your trust." He studied her, gray eyes piercing. "You tried to protect me even when it endangered you. That is not betrayal. That is courage." "I don't deserve your kindness," she murmured. "Perhaps not," he said softly, "but you have it, regardless." A silence settled, fragile, trembling, charged with everything unsaid. Then the Earl turned slightly toward the window. "I received a message from London this morning. Lord Ashcombe has sent word to the Crown accusing me of sedition. His handwriting is everywhere on the documents, but the forgery was clumsy. I knew at once it was not yours." Clara's eyes widened. "He's turning against you?" "Against both of us," Adrian said, his jaw tightening. "You have no protection now. If you leave Ravensleigh, he will find you." A surge of dread rushed through her veins. "Then I'll go far from England," he interrupted, his voice low but commanding. "You'll go nowhere. You'll stay here under my protection." Her breath trembled. "You would still offer me that after everything?" "I told you," he said, stepping closer. "Mercy is the only defiance left to me. You showed me that." For a moment, she could not speak. The world seemed to narrow, just him, the space between them, and the faint sound of the sea. "I don't understand you," she whispered. "You have every reason to hate me." "Perhaps," he said, eyes darkening with quiet intensity, "but I don't." He moved to the hearth, his hands clasped behind his back. "When my wife died, I thought the world ended. I buried my heart with her and swore never to feel again. Then you came, full of questions, contradictions, and fire. You reminded me that life can still ache, and still matter. Clara's tears slipped silently down her cheeks. Don't say that, my lord. Why? Because it hurts. He turned back to her, his expression softening. Then we are both alive, Miss Whitmore. Outside, the wind howled, rattling the windows. He stepped forward slowly, as though crossing the space between past and present with every movement. When he stopped before her, he reached into his coat and produced something small, a folded piece of paper, its edges singed. She recognized it instantly, the forged letter. I could have sent this to the Crown, he said, let them condemn you, but instead I burned it, all but this scrap. He opened it, revealing only a single untouched line. The Earl of Renford is not what he seems. He looked at her. Those words are true, aren't they? I am not what you were told to find. Clara nodded through her tears. No, she whispered, you are infinitely more. A faint smile touched his lips, sorrowful, beautiful. Then stay. Help me. Make right what others would twist into wrong. Let your second chance be here, not running from what you've done. She hesitated, torn between fear and hope. And if I stay, then we begin again, he said simply. For a long moment she could not speak. Then, through trembling lips, she whispered, I will stay. The Earl inclined his head, a gesture of both respect and relief. Then you are no longer my spy, Miss Whitmore. You are my ally. And though neither dared to say it aloud, they both felt the truth bloom quietly in the silence that followed. She was also becoming something far more dangerous, the keeper of his heart. By the time spring came to Ravensleigh Hall, the moors had thawed, and so it seemed, had the hearts that once froze within its walls. The air smelled of rain and rebirth. The manor, once heavy with silence, now carried the faint sounds of life, laughter, piano notes from Lady Beatrice's lessons, and the soft tread of footsteps that no longer feared being heard. Clara and Earl Adrian Renford had fallen into a rhythm that neither dared define. She was no longer the guest under suspicion, nor the spy bound by guilt. She was his confidant now, his partner in something both righteous and forbidden, a quiet campaign to dismantle the web of deceit that Lord Ashcombe had woven through the Crown's politics. Each morning began with strategy instead of lessons. Letters arrived from London, coded messages and fragments of correspondence. The Earl's study, once a sanctuary of solitude, had become a war room. Papers littered the desk, ink bled across maps and ledgers, and in the middle of it all, the two of them worked side by side. His network is wide, Adrian said one afternoon, frowning over a report. He buys silence with favors and fear. To expose him, we must prove not his cruelty, but his greed. Clara leaned closer, her hair brushing his shoulder as she examined the document. If we follow the missing donations from the War Relief Fund, it might lead directly back to him. He turned his head slightly, their faces inches apart. You've learned to think like a strategist. She smiled faintly. Perhaps I had a good teacher. Their eyes met, and for a fleeting second, the air between them shimmered with unspoken truth, something fragile, alive, and dangerous. Adrian broke the gaze first, clearing his throat. We'll need witnesses, he said gruffly. Men who can testify that Ashcombe's orders led to the soldiers' suffering. I can reach out to Captain Ellery, she offered. He's loyal to you. He'll help. The Earl nodded. And what of you, Clara? Helping me may cost you your freedom. Ashcombe won't rest until he's silenced you. She hesitated, her heart pounding. My freedom means nothing if I live it with regret. He looked at her then, really looked, and in his expression was the weight of everything unsaid. You are braver than any soldier I've known. Perhaps bravery, she said softly, is simply what's left when fear no longer serves. He smiled, a quiet, reverent smile that made her chest ache. Then God help me, Miss Whitmore. I am beginning to fear again. The days grew longer, and with them came closeness that neither of them could control. She began to anticipate his footsteps in the corridor, the sound of his voice as he dictated letters, the way he would pause beside her chair, close enough for her to feel the warmth of his presence. At times their hands brushed over documents, and neither moved away fast enough. At night, when the manor slept, Clara often found herself in the library, her candle flickering low. It was there that Adrian found her one evening, hunched over the desk, piecing together ledgers and records. "You should rest," he said gently, his voice rough with fatigue. "I can't," she replied without looking up. "If we can connect these transactions, the case will be complete." He stepped closer. "You've done more than enough. Let me carry the rest." "You've carried too much already," she said quietly, turning toward him. "Your burdens, your losses, your silence." The room fell still. He took a step forward, then another, until the candlelight painted gold against his face. "You don't know what you've done to this house," he murmured. "To me," Clara's voice trembled. "If I've made your life harder, I'm sorry." "Harder?" His eyes softened. "No, Clara, you've made it unbearable to be alone." She felt her heart stop. Her name, not Miss Whitmore, but Clara, on his lips sounded like a confession. He hesitated, his hand half raised as though reaching for her and stopping himself at the same time. "Forgive me," he whispered. "I have no right." Her eyes glistened. "You have every right to feel, my lord. It's what makes you kind." He smiled sadly. "Kindness is dangerous. You of all people should know that." Before either could say more, a knock echoed through the corridor. Captain Ellery entered, breathless and pale. "Your Grace, they've discovered Ashcombe's network. But he knows. He's moving against you." The moment shattered. Adrian straightened, his soldier's instinct snapping back. "Then it begins." Clara stood beside him, her hand brushing his, not by accident this time. "Whatever comes," she said softly, "I will stand with you." He looked down at her hand, then at her face, and nodded. Then let the world do its worst. The storm that would change everything arrived without warning. It was early summer, and Ravensleigh Hall lay bathed in the stillness that comes before a reckoning. The air outside was heavy, as if the earth itself held its breath. Inside, Clara and Earl Adrian Renford worked feverishly in the library, their final pieces of evidence spread before them like a map of salvation and ruin. Through months of careful effort, they had gathered everything: forged invoices, diverted funds, testimony from injured soldiers and widows. Every page they laid down was another nail in Lord Ashcombe's coffin. But the closer they came to victory, the closer the shadows seemed to press against the windows. Clara leaned over the desk, candlelight glinting in her hair. "These ledgers link directly to the Treasury account," she said, her voice hushed with disbelief. "He's been siphoning the Crown's relief funds for years." Adrian's jaw tightened. He built his empire on the backs of the dying. He rose, pacing before the fire. His silhouette flickered against the walls, tall and dark and resolute. "Tomorrow we deliver this to the Home Office. Once the Council sees these, Ashcombe will be stripped of his title and fortune." Clara's hands trembled slightly as she gathered the papers. "And when that happens, he'll come for us." Adrian stopped and looked at her, really looked. "Then he'll find I no longer hide behind walls." A silence followed, thick with things unspoken. Then he reached for the stack of documents, his gloved hand brushing hers. The contact was electric, too brief, too charged. "Go to bed, Clara," he said softly, not meeting her eyes. "You'll need your strength for what comes next." But sleep would not come that night. Clara wandered the halls until she reached the balcony overlooking the gardens. The storm clouds had gathered above, rolling and restless. She thought of her life before this. The girl who obeyed, who feared, who betrayed. That girl no longer existed. She did not hear the carriage wheels until it was too late. By the time the thunder cracked, the front gates of Ravensleigh were already flung wide. Lanterns bobbed in the darkness, riders, armed and cloaked, Ashcombe's men. A shout echoed from the courtyard. Servants ran for cover. Clara rushed to the stairs just as Adrian appeared, gun in hand, his expression grim. "How did he find us?" she gasped. "He didn't need to," Adrian said, his voice low and controlled. "He was watching all along." The front doors burst open. Rain poured in, mingling with the firelight. And there, stepping through the threshold, was Lord Ashcombe, older now, his charm stripped to cruelty. "Ah, Ravensleigh," he drawled. "Still a tomb for noble fools, I see." "Leave," Adrian said sharply. "You're trespassing." "On the contrary," Ashcombe replied, holding up a warrant. "By royal decree, I come to arrest you for treason." Clara's heart lurched. "You forged this," she said. Ashcombe's gaze slid to her. "Ah, my little spy, You disappoint me. I give you freedom, and you repay me with betrayal." Adrian stepped between them, fury in his eyes. "You will not speak to her." Ashcombe smiled. "Ah, so the Earl has gone soft for his pet." The insult burned through the air. Adrian didn't answer. He simply raised the pistol and cocked it. The sound cracked through the hall like thunder. "You destroyed lives for profit," he said. "The only treason here is yours." Ashcombe sneered. "Then shoot me, hero. But what will become of her when the soldiers arrive? She's already branded a traitor." Clara's pulse pounded. Every word was a trap. "Don't listen to him," she whispered. "He's trying to—" But before she could finish, one of Ashcombe's men lunged. Chaos erupted. Shouts, the crash of overturned furniture, the flash of steel. Clara ducked as a bullet shattered the glass beside her. Adrian fired once, disarming the attacker, then turned to her. "Go, hide in the cellar." "I won't leave you," she cried. "You will if you love me," he shouted, his voice breaking for the first time. For a heartbeat, time stopped. Then Clara ran, through the smoke and noise, down the narrow servants' passage, her tears mixing with rain as she stumbled into the darkness below. She waited there for what felt like hours. When the gunfire ceased, the silence that followed was worse. She crept back upstairs, her heart pounding. The hall was wrecked, furniture splintered, glass shattered. The men were gone. Only Adrian remained, standing before the door, his coat torn, blood streaked across his sleeve. "It's over," he said, voice hoarse. "Ashcombe fled. The Crown's men will be here by morning." Clara rushed to him, hands shaking. "You're hurt." "It's nothing," he murmured, wincing. "You're safe. That's all that matters." Her tears fell freely now. "I thought I'd lost you." He met her gaze then, and whatever walls had once held them apart fell away. "You never will," he whispered. She threw her arms around him, clinging to him as the storm raged beyond the windows, and when he held her, his hand at the back of her neck, his breath warm against her hair, the truth finally broke free. The spy had found her purpose, the soldier had found his peace, and together, amid the ruins of deception, they had found love, fierce, forbidden, and undeniable. The dawn that followed was unlike any other. The storm had spent itself during the night, leaving the world rinsed clean and trembling in gold. Ravensleigh Hall, battered, bruised, but still standing, gleamed beneath the pale morning light. Smoke still curled faintly from the fireplaces, mingling with the scent of rain-soaked earth and crushed roses. Clara stood in the garden, her gown torn and hem damp with dew. The battle had ended, but its echo lingered, every heartbeat still loud in her chest. She turned her face toward the horizon, where the first warmth of sunlight broke through the clouds, and for the first time in years, she let herself breathe. Behind her, footsteps approached, measured, familiar. She didn't turn, she didn't have to. "You should be resting," came Adrian's low voice. "I could say the same to you," she replied softly. "You're wounded." He stepped beside her, his right arm bound in a makeshift bandage. The faint bruising on his cheek did nothing to diminish his dignity. In fact, in the morning light, he looked almost unreal, a man carved from endurance and quiet sorrow, tempered by something gentler now. "The Crown's men arrived before dawn," he said. "Ashcombe's been captured. He won't hurt anyone again." Clara exhaled shakily. "Then it's over." Adrian nodded. "It should feel like victory." "But it doesn't?" He looked out across the gardens where the storm had flattened the rose bushes. "I've won battles before," he said quietly, "but I never felt the cost until now." Clara turned toward him. "You mean the men who died under his command?" He hesitated, then shook his head slowly. "No, Clara, I mean you." Her breath caught. "Me?" He met her eyes, steady, searching. "If you hadn't come to Ravensleigh, I might have lived out my days in bitterness. I would have believed the world cruel and unchangeable. But you—" His voice faltered, and for the first time, she saw tears glint in his eyes. "You reminded me that decency still exists, that love isn't weakness." She looked away, overwhelmed. "You don't mean that." He took a step closer, his hand hovering near her shoulder but not daring to touch. "Don't tell me what I mean," he whispered. "I swore after the war I'd never love again. That promise kept me alive, but it also kept me dead inside." Her lips trembled. "And now?" "Now," he he said, his voice breaking into a whisper. I look at you and realize that vow was a coward's refuge. I am not afraid to love you, Clara Whitmore. Not anymore. The morning breeze stirred between them, carrying the scent of rain and earth and lilac. Clara's eyes filled with tears that spilled freely down her cheeks. You can't love me, she said, her voice trembling. Not truly. I'm no noble woman. I came here under false pretenses. I lied to you. Adrian's expression softened into something almost tender. You came here with a broken heart and the courage to do what was right. If that's deceit, then I wish the world were full of such liars. She gave a shaky laugh through her tears. You'll ruin your reputation saying things like that. He smiled faintly. Then let it be ruined. Slowly, so slowly he might have been afraid she'd vanish, he reached out and brushed a tear from her cheek. When you walked into my home, I saw a spy. When you sang in my halls, I saw a spirit I'd long forgotten. But when you risked your life for truth, I saw the woman I could never live without. The words landed between them like a vow. Clara's hand rose of its own accord, fingers brushing the bandage at his arm. You could have been killed, she whispered. I'd die 1,000 times. He said, his voice rough, if it meant keeping you safe. For a heartbeat, neither moved. Then she closed the distance. Her hand slid into his, her forehead resting against his chest, her tears dampening his shirt. Adrian let out a shuddering breath and wrapped his arm around her, drawing her into the safety of his embrace. No grand words followed, no declarations shouted to the heavens, just two souls, long bruised by war and deceit, standing in a garden reborn by rain. When she finally looked up, her voice was barely more than a whisper. What happens now? He smiled faintly, pressing his lips to her hair. Now we begin again. She pulled back, meeting his gaze, her heart pounding in her throat. Together? Always, he said, if you'll have me. And for the first time since her world had shattered, Clara let herself smile, genuine, radiant, unguarded. Then I'm yours, Adrian Renford, heart, soul, and scandal alike. He laughed softly, a sound she had never heard from him before, unrestrained, full of wonder. Then let the scandal begin. Above them, the morning sun broke fully through the clouds, flooding Ravensleigh with light. The storm had passed, the spy had found her purpose, and the Earl, once a man bound by grief and solitude, had found his redemption not in victory, but in love. Spring returned to Ravensleigh as though it had been waiting for them. The manor, once a fortress of shadows, now breathed again. Its corridors no longer echoed with silence, but with laughter, footsteps, and the soft hum of life returning to stone. The roses that the storm had beaten into the earth rose again, thick with bloom and fragrance, curling around the iron gates like threads of forgiveness. Inside, the grand piano that had long stood covered in linen now gleamed beneath the sunlight. It was Clara's doing, of course. She had insisted that music should fill the halls again. A house without sound is a heart without pulse, she had said, and though Adrian had teased her for her philosophy, he'd secretly agreed. He would often watch her from the doorway as she played, head tilted, fingers gliding over ivory keys with grace that needed no perfection. Sometimes she sang the same song she had once hummed while pretending to be a maid. Other times, she improvised melodies so full of tenderness that he could only listen in stillness. The servants, once wary and tight-lipped, now adored her. She remembered their names, their families, their birthdays. She spoke to them not as a lady of the house but as an equal, and they loved her for it. Even Mrs. Harland, the severe housekeeper who'd once disapproved of everything from her laughter to her handwriting, had softened enough to say, "It's about time this house remembered what joy feels like." Adrian, for his part, was a changed man, not overnight, not easily, but completely. The scar of war and loss still marked his heart, but it no longer consumed him. When he looked out at the sea beyond the hills, he no longer saw ghosts, only the horizon, vast, open, and waiting. One morning, Clara found him in the garden, pruning the roses himself, his coat discarded, his sleeves rolled. She paused in the archway, smiling at the sight. "Your Grace," she teased, "if the papers saw you doing a gardener's work, society might faint." He turned, laughter lighting his face. "Let them faint. I find it rather satisfying." She walked toward him, brushing her fingers along the petals. "You never told me why you planted white roses here." His eyes softened. "Because they were Celeste's favorite," he admitted quietly. "I planted them for her once. But now," he reached out and tucked a red rose into her hand. "These are for you."